finished a training program and thought, I'll give you a few tips on how to make your training program very specific to yourself or to the athlete or the team you're training. Okay, so let's look at, as always, 5 ways how we can look at the specificity of your training program. So the first thing you need to do, if you haven't already done so, is check out the video on how to write a training program that we've done. Okay, it's very broad and it looks at a lot of different angles, but just to quickly recap, we need to look at what your athlete wants to achieve, what their short and long-term goals are, what their current situation's at, so doing some fitness testing, what sort of things they need to actually work on, okay, and then finally putting it all together into one big written program. That's the start, okay, so you need to get that planning done before we can start specifically putting in some training techniques and some training sessions. So we've got our plan. What we need to look at is, what is the athlete wanting to achieve? What is the sport? What is the event that they're training for? What are their goals? So let's look at a sport like football, soccer, the world game. Okay, there's a lot of endurance involved. There's a lot of, so that the game goes for 90 minutes at a minimum. Okay, there's a lot of running, so an athlete needs to go for a long amount of time. But there's also going to be some short, sharp efforts. There's going to be some quick sprints. They're going to need some anaerobic fitness in there as well. There's a huge amount of skill involved. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of skill work as well. Okay, so there's 3 things we need to look at. If we compare that to, say, a marathon runner, okay, biggest thing there is endurance. Yes, they need a certain level of speed, and that's important too, and anaerobic capacity, but they need to look at endurance. If we then compare that to, say, a 400-meter hurdler, okay, again, there's a certain level of endurance in there, which is quite high, but the anaerobic aspect is so much higher. There's going to be a technique and a specific technique to get over those hurdles. There needs to be acceleration and power at the start, okay, coming off the hurdles, going over the hurdles. So you can see you've got to look at the sport, look at the requirements, so that we can start putting together exactly what your athlete needs to train on. Now, if our athlete is looking at aerobic capacity, okay, so that's being able to go at a certain intensity for a long period of time. So we need to look at, obviously, training over long periods of time. We want to make whatever training we're doing is specific to the event or the sport that we're training for. So if it's a marathon, okay, let's train by running. Okay, if it's a long distance cycling event, let's train by cycling. Okay, so the more specific we make it, the better prepared we're going to be on the day of the event when we need to perform. That's not saying that when we're trying to get a base that we can do some cross-training and some different things. Absolutely, because we need that variation and that enjoyment and challenging our body in different ways. But as we start getting closer to competition and start getting more, I guess, need to tune our body a little bit more to the specific event we're doing, our training needs to be a lot more specific. So with endurance, we need to look at long distances. So steady for a long amount of time. We can then start working a little bit of intensity into there, where we might do some fartlek training, which sounds rude, but basically, if we're going for a long run, within that run we might do 10 efforts of 100-meter sprints in there. Okay, so we're jogging along, we go, righty, I'm going to sprint to that next house, or sprint to that letterbox, or that telegraph pole. Okay, so you put in an effort, then you ease back and you try and recover. Then you do another one. Okay, so we're increasing our intensity. We then might start incorporating some interval training into that. So instead of running solidly for, say, half an hour, okay, we might do, instead of half an hour, let's say 5 kilometres. It might be a 5 kilometre run we're doing. Okay, so let's do 5 1-kilometre runs, but we're going to do a 1 kilometre, then we're going to have a rest. We're going to do 1 kilometre, then have a rest, and do that 5 times. Okay, that means we can run a lot harder over that 1 kilometre because we're about to have a rest. Okay, so after our rest, we're still a little bit tired, but we go as hard as we can again. Okay, then we have another rest. So you can see that in something like that, we're going to be running faster, and we're going to get our heart rate up higher than if we just do a long, steady, continuous run. Okay, so there's a few different ways that we can start looking at increasing our endurance. With our anaerobic capacity, this is where we need to put in short, sharp efforts and be able to recover quickly and be able to go again. Or it might just be a short, sharp one-off effort. Okay, it might be a 100-metre sprint or a 200-metre sprint, which might be 10 seconds if you're pretty quick. Okay, or it might be closer to 15 seconds if you're not as quick, okay? But it's still a short, sharp effort, okay? So the types of training we want to do there, again, is mainly focusing around interval training, but shorter intervals, okay? So we might do some 400-meter intervals, or some intervals that might take, say, 60 seconds of a big effort, a flat-out effort, and then recover for 60 seconds. Or if we're trying to recover a little bit quicker, we might go for a 30-second recovery and go again. Okay, it's not pleasant training. It's going to increase a lot of lactate in the system, which makes your legs go wobbly, makes you feel nauseous, okay? Not real pleasant, okay? But you're starting to teach your body to adapt, to use that, to try and get rid of that lactate out of the system, okay? So that you can repeat that effort as fast as you can again. Okay, so with your anaerobic training, you might then start decreasing the distance that you're running. So you might come down to a 100-meter or a 50-meter sprint, okay, which might only take you, say, 5 to 10 seconds, but then you're only having a small rest in between again. Okay, so we start to look at doing sets and repetitions of these. So we might do 3 sets of 5 repetitions. Okay, so we might do a set of 5 400-meter runs. Okay, each 400 takes us, say 80 seconds. Okay, we might have a 60-second break. So we do that 5 times, then have a good break and recover. Okay, so we do that set 3 times. That might be an anaerobic training session. Okay. Now, if we need to look at going into the gym, there's 4 different things we can focus on basically within a resistance training session. We can look at hypertrophy, so increasing our muscle size. Okay, in which sense, generally what we're looking at is doing pretty high intensity, pretty high volume, pretty limited rest. So if we're looking at, say, 3 or 4 exercises per body part, we might be looking at, say, 3 sets of 10 to 12 to 15 repetitions with about 60 seconds in between. So it should take us about 60 to 90 seconds to get through an exercise. So if we're doing a bench press, it might take us about a minute and a half to get through the repetitions. Then we have about a minute to rest. We do the same thing again. Okay, so we are going to fatigue ourselves through the session. If we then progress onto a strength training phase, then we want to start lifting heavier weights. We do less repetitions and we have more rest. We want to be training fresh, okay, so that we can lift as heavy as we can. The whole idea with strength training is to try and increase our strength through lifting heavier weights. Okay, so again, if it's a bench press, we might only do 2 repetitions or 3 or 4 or 5 repetitions, but we're going to have a good 2 to 3 to even up to a 5-minute rest in between so that we can lift as much as we can and we're fully recovered for the next set. Now if we go to power, power is very similar to strength, but what we're doing, we will drop the weight back a little bit and really go through really explosive movements. Okay, so quick, fast, short, powerful movements, maintaining our technique. We're still not doing many repetitions, say 2 to 5 repetitions. Okay, we're still having a big rest in between because we want to be fully recovered. The other thing we can do with weights is endurance weights. Smaller weights, doing a lot more of them, so we might be doing upwards of 30 repetitions, only a small rest in between. Okay, so there's 4 things that we can look at with resistance training. Now, probably one of the most important things with any sort of specific training is looking at the skills that our sport needs. Okay, so if our sport involves a football, okay, or a cricket ball, or a baseball, or a bat, okay, let's put that equipment into the hands of our athletes, make it enjoyable, incorporate some skills in with the actual fitness training sessions, okay, so we mix it around. We get some fitness aspects, but we also get some skill aspects in our training session. And it's going to make it a lot more fun, okay? You give me a ball, okay, and I'll run around, I'll do all sorts of things with the ball and have good fun with it, and I probably won't notice that I'm getting an anaerobic or an endurance or an aerobic or even a resistance training effect out of it, okay, because I've got a ball in my hands and it's keeping my mind off how my body's feeling. Okay, so doing that sort of thing, creating some skills, making your training sessions as specific to your sport or event as possible is certainly going to help the performance of your athletes. So there you go, there's 5 tips that are hopefully going to help you make your training programs as specific as possible. Okay, so remember to incorporate some variation into your training programs, keep making things harder, keep challenging people, okay, and you're going to get the most out of yourself, your athlete or your teams.